Hello everyone, and thanks for coming back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at the GEPRC Skip HD3. Inside we have the GEPRC 12 amp F4 flight controller and ESC combo, Caddx Baby Turtle V2, VTX is smart audio controlled with pit mode, 25 milliwatts, 100 milliwatts, and 200 milliwatts via Tramp protocol. Motors are GEPRC 1105 5000 kV motors, and the props are the HQ 3018 bi-bladed props. Comes with a 25 volt 330 microfarad capacitor, cheapo depot battery strap, battery pad for your battery mounting, magic tape to hold your wires down. I added the zip tie for the battery lead. It does come with these antenna tubes, but you do need to cut them to length. Comes with a Caddx control board to customize the settings of your camera. I had some antenna tube left over and 2 additional ends. Got some random foam in here, not sure what that's for. 2 extra prop screws, a screwdriver, an extra battery strap, a hex tool. It does come with a complete set of second props, but I lost 2. And say it with me, stickers. It weighs just about 73.5 grams. I flew it on this GNB 3S 520 milliamp battery, which brings the all-up weight to just over 116 grams. Bottom plate looks to be 2.5 millimeters thick. Arms look to be almost 6 millimeters wide. And motor post to motor post, I am getting about 118 millimeters. So I've got the camera angle maxed out. This is all the way against the top of the canopy, and we still get a little bit of prop in view. If you look real close, in the very, very corners, you can see a little bit of the prop. And if you had different colors, you might see a little bit more of the prop. But that's all on a side. What I find amazing about this is how stable the footage is. We've seen a lot of these micros then transition from a typical FPV camera into an FPV/HD camera, and typically we see quite a bit of jello. Some might see it as a lot, some might see it as a little bit. It kind of depends on your perspective. But this one, I was really surprised. I really did not expect to find such stable footage. Now, you tell me if I'm crazy here, but to me, this looks really stable. Yeah, the tune might have a little bit of prop wash, and I might need to do a better job of flying around some of those things, but I'm not really trying to fly around those things. I'm trying to show you, in my flying fashion, how this thing flies and what you see in the camera. But with all that aside, tell me what you think of the footage as far as its stability goes. And then also grade the camera. Some people prefer the run cam, some people prefer the Caddx, you might prefer the Foxeer. There's a whole bunch of different preferences that could be there, but let me know what you think about the camera and how stable this footage is. I will show you another flight after this flight, or at least a sample of the flight, that's more of a slow, cruisy flight. And I should also mention that our flight times with the battery that I showed you, the 520 milliamp 3S GNB battery, comes in at over 3 minutes. And I was really surprised. Flying like this, you know, I have a hard time keeping, you know, my altitude in control sometimes. I'm used to a bit more camera angle when I try to fly like this, so I kind of balloon up. But flying in my normal nature, I get over 3 minutes of flight time on a 520 milliamp 3S battery. And I found that also a little bit remarkable. I think it's the combination of efficient motors and low pitch prop. But it flies very well, and the stable looks pretty good. We get a little bit tangled up in this tree right here, but you know, we recover and just go about having some fun. And the punch outs are pretty good as well. You know, I just overall was pretty happy with this. I try not to sway you guys too much, but you know, oftentimes in micros we're wanting the super tiny, like the hoop kind that can do as HD footage inside, and I have yet to see one that's just as stable as this. So if you have the skill set and you want to do some inside stable flying footage, this might be a pretty good candidate to look at, although it doesn't have the safety factor that hoops typically do. Something that you have to decide whether it fits what you're wanting this particular quad to do in itself. Also, I should say that just a video ago I was talking about how we don't see too many bind and flies, and when I recorded that video, I hadn't flown this one yet. And this is really, really close to being just as foolproof. I didn't tune this. This came with this tune on it. It came with, you have modes set up on it, and you have the OSD set up on it. But I always move stuff around to fit what I'm expecting, what you're expecting here on the channel, and what I'm expecting in the switches. So there is a little bit of setup after binding if you have a preference for some of those things. But other than that, you pretty much charge it up, bind it up, and go fly and have fun. Okay, let's go into the slower flight now. This is that cruisy flight that I was talking about, where I'm just trying to be stable, I'm trying to be smooth, and I'm sure many of you could do a much better job than I am, but I'm trying to show you in this sort of flight that you can fly these things slower if that's your sort of flight style. You know, all flying is fun. It doesn't matter if it's impressive to someone else or not. What matters is that it's fun. but also if you're someone who wants to do some sort of filming on how good the flight footage, it may have been a little bit difficult when I'm trying to fly around at my normal style of how good the flight footage may have been in the HD recording. I should mention, for those that are newer to this sort of thing, the HD footage is recorded on board. This is not what we see in the goggles. What we see in the goggles is much lower resolution, and I will show you that. I do think the Run Cam Nano, the Split Nano 3 or what have you it's called, I forget the names all the time, has a better FPV view than the Caddx one does. But I will show it to you, and then you can decide for yourself whether it's something that is going to suit you or not, or if it's something that you can push down on your list of priorities in order to make the sacrifice of the footage and the microing of this sort of quad. That's up to you. You've got to judge these things on whether it's worth your dollar or not. And yes, both of these flights came on the same day. Directly after this, it got cloudy and kind of nasty to look at, and then the wind started picking up. We have a little bit of a breeze in this flight, not much. I would say it's less than 5 miles an hour when it does come through, and that's kind of why I stuck to the backyard a little bit, because we do have a breeze, and the houses do tend to help protect the flight from too much interference of the wind. But you're not going to be able to fly this and get really good smooth footage in, say, 10 to 15 mile an hour winds. It just won't work out very well, or at least I wouldn't expect it to work out very well from what I've seen with micros and HD footage. The more wind you have, the more unstable your flight footage gets. This flight, again, on the GNB 3S 520 milliamp battery, it goes on for well over 6 minutes, this slow, cruisy flight. So if you've got GNB batteries and you have maintained them like I have, which honestly, I don't really maintain my batteries all that good, you'll probably get at least the same amount of time that I get in this flight style. This is what you see in the goggles. So we have some glitching happening across the screen, or some static or some lines. That is the video transmission. I am flying on 200 milliwatts in this particular case. I didn't think the reception was anything to write home about, because we're not that far out and we are at 200 milliwatts. We do have that capacitor, but it's way down on the lead. I don't see any noise, but again, that's another thing I think that those of you that are discernible to that sort of thing, you need to take a close look at. But this is the view that we get, and as you can see, there's a dramatic difference than what we see in the onboard recording for the HD camera. So we have a camera that doubles at not only HD recording, but also in transmitting our FPV feed back to the goggles, so that we can fly as though we're sitting inside the quad. But it's always important to show you this stuff, because you never know who's going to come watch the video and maybe get confused about what it is that this product is doing. So a couple little details I didn't talk about in the quick roll. One is this frame is chamfered. It's very smooth, so you won't get any carbon splinters, or the chance of getting a carbon splinter should be pretty low because of the smooth edges. And as far as the stiffness goes, let's see, get my thumbs in here. It's pretty stiff. It's not as stiff as the last one, but it's a lot stiffer than many others that we've seen on the channel. We do get some flex, but it's relatively stiff. And also, I think what they've done is fairly interesting here with the mounting of the camera. I thought initially that this area of the print was thicker, but I don't think it is. I just think it's because the camera's in there and it firms up this area. I kind of felt the wrong part. But, you know, as you can see back here, hopefully you can tell, that TPU print is pretty flexible still. You can see the antennas moving around as I push down here in the middle. Probably the secret to that stabilized footage is that metal standoff in the front, and there's also another one in the rear. And they do use metal screws to secure those down, and that is probably their magic or their secret code to creating a mount or canopy that is nice and stable, holds the camera still. That way you get some good flight footage. So other manufacturers, if you're using HD cameras, you need to learn from GEPRC here. And just for verification, there's the backside where you can see the metal standoff in there as well. But obviously it's very, very short. Something else that metal standoff will do, it should help keep the stack from making any sort of adjustments when we crash. And one of my concerns with that is we don't have very much room behind the USB port down here. That is real close. We've got a little bit of room, but if that stack were to shift around much, it might bonk into that carbon, you know, repeat, and next thing you know, your USB port, which is the outer shell. We really only need the inside piece. That outer shell could break off if it just bumps up against there repeatedly. But that's a concern I have, but it's also unfounded. Obviously, we've got connectors on here. So GEPRC made motors. We've seen these motors on the channel before. I believe I tested the 1105 5000 kVs clear back in the summer or spring, but now they've got connectors on here. So if you were to need to replace a motor, that would be pretty straightforward and simple. Of course, if you need to replace any of these components, you're going to have to take everything apart in order to get it back together. And to my surprise, they do use nylon screws all the way through on their stack. The front and the rear just mount the canopy, and then inside here we have the, you probably can't see that down in there, but you can see it better at the rear, to where we have the soft mounting, the rubber pieces, and then we've got nylon screws going through there. Our receiver is right up here, and it does come within the canopy. All I had to do was press that gold button that you see down there, plug in power, and turned it on and bound it up to my radio. And as I said, I just moved the OSD elements where I like to have them, set my switches as I do on all the quads, and I was ready to go. Another thing about the VTX, the antenna, hopefully you can see that right down there. We've got a little bit of material. I'm not sure if that's rubber standoff. They figured out a way to get down through there, but that helps to keep the antenna from flopping too far away and getting into the prop line. It is possible, as you can see, because it's not rigid and it's not stiff, but I think it's very, very unlikely, considering the only amount of bend you can get out of the antenna is that little extent that's hanging out there, and they did add that rubber down in there in order to help shore that up. You do have these on top that could help you in a turtle mode situation. I don't encourage anyone to use turtle mode unless it's a last resort to getting your quad back. You know, if it's hung up way up in a tree, or if it's on top of a building you don't have internal access to, that last resort of getting your quad back, turtle mode it, try to get it back to you rather than leaving one behind. Really, the only true complaints I would have as a pilot is the lack of camera angle. I could probably take, you know, my soldering iron and melt some of this TPU to get myself a little bit of camera angle, a little bit more camera angle. And then, of course, as with most bind and flies, the cheapo depot battery strap, I would sure like to see something else. I do think if you have one that you prefer to use, you could thread it through there. It might be a little bit of a challenge considering the stack is so low, so you might have to do some disassembly if you were to want to put your own battery strap in there. And the one I found, it was actually fairly long. You can see where the label was just starting, and I cut it off because I didn't want it up here in the side and possibly ticking on one of the props or anything of that nature. I should draw your attention to the port right down here. That's for changing the settings on your camera, so you can change the frame rate or whatever settings. If you want to record at a different video setting, it's recording at 1080p 60 frames a second, and it is set to auto record. Those have kind of become standard functions now that we have these cameras, and they're so widely available that they come set up that way. I haven't been changing them in any way, shape, or form, but they do give you the control board if you were to need to connect that up and then make a setting change on your camera for your own personal needs. We've got GEPRC screws all over the place. We see a little bit silver, a little bit shininess, and then we have the Phillips headed nylon screws that are mounting the stack in all 4 locations there. So outside of those 4, everything else is going to be metal. Well, I should include the top of the stack too. So 8 screws will be nylon, everything else will be metal, and those nylon screws will be Phillips headed. I'm not a fan of those Phillips headed. I bring it up every time, but it's here, so I bring it to your attention. So I'd have to say at this point, GEPRC is one of the few manufacturers to figure out how to get pretty good, or real good, or fantastic, depending upon your point of view of what you've seen, HD footage out of a micro. I'm pretty happy with it. I thought the performance was at very least reasonable, and the efficiency was pretty good as well. You know, flying over 3 minutes, carrying that HD camera, all that TPU. I thought it did pretty well. What did you think? Where does this fit in your flight toolbox? Do you need one? Do you not want one? Do you have 2 already? Tell me what you think of this one compared to maybe experiences that you've had. And if you have any other comments, questions, suggestions, or ideas, please let me know in that section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.